Hi, my name is Rachel Paxton, and today I'm going to show you how to can homemade chicken broth. In this class, I'll teach you how to can homemade chicken broth. I'll lead you through the process step by step. I'll give you the recipe and the canning supply list that you can download and print out. Those are in the course materials. You'll also gain the confidence you need to try more pressure canning recipes on your own. My name is Rachel Paxton. I'm a freelance writer and mom of 5 children ages 28 to 7. I've been canning for more than 20 years, and I'm the owner of the website creativehomemaking.com. For this recipe, you're going to need leftover chicken with the bones still intact, onion, carrots, and celery. I haven't listed any amounts of ingredients because for this recipe, it doesn't really matter how much you use. I usually use about 1 onion, about a cup of carrots, and a cup of celery. As far as the chicken goes, I usually take a whole chicken and I'll roast it in my roasting pan for dinner, and then save whatever chicken and bones are left over to make broth with. If you're not able to get to your chicken again right away after you eat it, you can put it in the freezer and freeze it until you're ready to make your chicken broth. You're also going to need a pressure canner. You can't use a boiling water canner for this. You have to use a pressure canner. You also need a jar lifter and pint or quart canning jars. I made 6 quarts of chicken broth with this recipe, so that would be 12 pints, but you can make less of it. You don't have to make that much. Just can however much of it that you want to. This is a dial gauge pressure canner. There's a weighted gauge and a dial gauge canner. This is the dial gauge. This is what I use, so this is what I'm going to show you how to use today. You can get these on Amazon for about $60. There's a link to this in your course materials on your supply list. You're also going to need a jar lifter to take your jars in and out of the pan. You want to place your onions, carrots, and celery in a large stock pot or roasting pan. This is my turkey pan that I used to, I cooked the chicken in this pan also the night before. And I filled this halfway with water. If you're using a stock pot, you could fill it all the way with water. Again, it depends on how much broth you want to make. You don't have to use this much water if you want to make less than this. So it's kind of up to you how much you want to make. So place all your vegetables in the pan. This is what my chicken looked like. You want to make sure to put the bones in too, not just the meat, because a lot of the flavor in the broth comes out of the bones, not just the chicken. So make sure you save the bones too. So add everything to your pan and put the cover on it. You want to cook your broth for at least 3 to 6 hours. Again, you don't have to cook it for a certain amount of time. You'll notice that the longer you cook it, the more golden colored your broth will be, and that's what you want. It takes a while for the flavor to come out of the bones in your chicken, and you'll notice that your chicken carcass will just fall apart and the meat will fall off, and that's how you kind of know it's done, when everything just falls to pieces. You can even cook this overnight if you'd like, especially in your roasting pan. Just turn it on low heat and let it cook overnight. I had mine on 300 degrees, so it will cook a little faster. Mine cooked in about 5 hours, I think. The longer you cook it, the better. So be patient. You want to have really good chicken broth, so cook it as long as you can. When your broth is about done, you want to sterilize your jars, rings, and lids in the dishwasher. If you don't have a dishwasher, you can sterilize them in a pan in hot water on the stove. Fill your pressure canner with about 3 inches of water and start bringing it to a boil. Next, you want to strain your broth into your jars, leaving an inch headspace. The reason you want to strain it is because you don't want little bits of chicken and vegetables and stuff floating around in your broth. You want to have a clear broth, so if you use a fine mesh sieve like this and just set it on top of your jar, I just took a ladle and ladled the broth from the pan through the sieve, and it left all the stuff in the top of the sieve and left the clear broth in the bottom. You can buy these at Walmart. They're very inexpensive. You can also order them from Amazon in different sizes. There's a link to this in the supply list in your course materials. And again, you want to leave a 1-inch head space. The head space is the amount of space between the top of the liquid and the top of the jar. It's important when you're canning to have the correct amount of head space. When you're heating your jars or processing them, the liquid in your jars will expand, and if there's not enough head space in your jars can explode in your canner. So just make sure that whatever the recipe calls for, that's how much head space you leave. For this recipe, it is 1 inch. Next, you want to wipe the rims of the jars with a damp paper towel or dish towel. This is to make sure there's no liquid on top of the jars that would keep your jars from sealing correctly. One tip I learned recently is when you are processing meat or anything that has any kind of oil or grease in it, sometimes the oil on top of your jars will not wipe off, which is water. So what I do is dampen my towel with water first, and then I put a little vinegar on it also, and the vinegar will remove the oil better than the water. So just use a little white vinegar and wipe the rims of your jars. You want to make sure that you get a good seal. If there's any grease on the top of your jar, your lid will not seal. Next, place your lids and rings on the jars, just finger tight. Next, you want to put your jars in your pressure canner. Again, you should have had about 2 or 3 inches of water in there to start with. When you put your jars in, your jars should be about halfway covered up with water. They're not fully covered with water like they are in a boiling water canner. You want to process your jars in the pressure canner at 10 pounds pressure. Process pints for 20 minutes or quarts for 25 minutes. This is the parts of a pressure canner. If you've never used a pressure canner before, what you want to do is after you put your jars in the pan and make sure you have the right amount of water, you want to lock your lid in place. The first thing you do is take the pressure regulator off of your vent pipe and just set it on the counter. Turn the heat on your burner up to high, and in about 10 minutes or so, when the water starts boiling really well, you'll see steam coming out of your vent pipe. At that point, you want to wait for 10 minutes and let the steam vent out of the pipe, and after 10 minutes, put the pressure regulator back on the vent pipe. At that time, the pressure will start building in your pan. Your lid lock will pop up. That's how you know that there is pressure in your pan, and your pressure on your dial gauge will start rising. For this recipe, you want 10 pounds of pressure. So when your pressure starts getting close to 10 pounds, you want to turn the heat down on your stove. You want to get your heat just at the right temperature so that your dial gauge stays at 10 pounds of pressure. If it falls below 10 pounds of pressure while you're timing your processing time, you will have to start your timing over again. So make sure that it stays at the correct pressure. When you get the right temperature, which will probably be medium, low, closer to low, by the time your pressure is regulated, then you won't have to adjust your temperature anymore, but just turn your temperature down or else the pressure will keep building in your pan, and you don't want the pressure to keep building. So right when it's at 10 pounds of pressure and you've got the right temperature on your stove, you want to set your timer for however much time, whether you have pints or quarts. And if you're above 1,000 feet in elevation, you're going to need to increase the amount of pressure in your pan to get the water to the correct temperature. So if you're above 1,000 feet in elevation, you need to check the altitude adjustment chart, which is in your course materials. After you set your timer and after the timer's up, don't move your pan or open it. You just want to turn the heat off on the stove, and as the temperature falls in your pan, the pressure will start releasing. And so when the pressure is released, your lid lock will go back down. That's how you know that there's no pressure in your pan anymore. You never want to open your pressure canner when the lid lock is up. So after the lid lock goes down, which will be about 10 or 15 minutes after you turn the heat off, then you can open your lid and take the jars out. Use a jar lifter to remove your jars and set them on a kitchen counter to cool. When you're pressure canning, usually your jars will seal in the pressure canner, but occasionally they won't. So I know about half of mine sealed in the canner and the other half weren't sealed yet. So just set them on the counter. Their jars will be very hot. You'll notice that the liquid is still boiling in the jars. It takes a couple hours actually for these jars to cool off. They get very hot in the pressure canner. So just let them sit, and it might take 10 or 15 minutes for some of them to seal. You should hear a pinging noise. You can tell if they're sealed or not by pushing your finger down in the middle of the lid. If it goes down and up again, then it is not sealed. And you can either clean up your jars and use a new lid and process them all over again, which is totally fine, or you can put it in the refrigerator and eat it within the next week. So that's what you do if one of them doesn't seal. But if it does seal, you can put it in a cool, dark area for 1 to 2 years. This chicken broth is really nice to have on hand. If you taste this compared to chicken broth made with chicken bouillon from the store, there's no comparison. This gives your meals a homemade taste that you can't beat, and it's much healthier too. I use this to make chicken soup and clam chowder and chicken enchiladas, so I use chicken broth quite a bit. And it's basically free when you're using it, your leftover vegetables and your leftover chicken to make it. So it does take more than a day to make it from start to finish, but it really doesn't take very much time at one time, because especially if you cook it overnight, just put everything in the roasting pan before you go to bed and let it cook overnight, and then you just have to process them the next day. So you don't have to even do it all at one time. So it's definitely worth the effort. Give it a try. Hope you enjoy this recipe.